In the upcoming episode, we are thrilled to have my ex-workspace neighbor and Hectomillion startup founder, Dan Shapiro. Not only does he expose some of the best tips on how he built his fourth startup to more than 100 million in ARR, but how he makes decisions on building that optimal team to truly execute in today's ultra-competitive markets. In this special two-part series, we share the first half of this fantastic conversation today and split up the second part in a separate episode coming soon. We hope you enjoy part one of Dan Shapiro, CEO of Seattle's 3D printing powerhouse startup Glowforge, who takes the hot seat on Startup Wins. I'm Brandon Na, your host, and I'm happy to share with you some of the amazing stories of startup founders, VCs, and the many operator experts who help our builders reach their amazing goals on our special podcast, Startup Wins. Thank you for listening. We are grateful for all your love.
Welcome to Startup Wins. Twice a month, we share real stories and smart tips. Subscribe and join the journey.
Welcome back to Startup Wins. We are actually privileged here to have old friend, I can say, that used to be in the co-working space that we were working.
Former startup roommate. Yes.
I know, right? I have watched this gentleman kind of go through all the different phases of startup exits and recreation and all this other stuff. But without further ado, let me introduce you to Dan Shapiro. And honestly, he resides in Seattle, but I will let you tell more about yourself if you don't mind.
Oh, thank you, Brandon. It is great to see you again because it has been a minute since we were both building businesses in that same strange building in the southern part of Seattle, sharing space with like this weird ghost place where it was Christmas all year round because retailers would come in to buy their Christmas assortment and everybody would make it look like Christmas, even though it was like the middle of spring. And this is the building where it was near the airport. So people would fly in and they'd come and they'd tour all these folks who were wholesalers who were hoping to sell to retailers and decide what to buy. And they were trying to make the top floor a startup accelerator. So we'd sort of go past all this bizarro world up into our own little bizarro world where we were building our companies. No. But yeah, that was startup 2 of 4. I actually started my career at Microsoft. I spent time working at somebody else's startup, which I'm not counting, building a Linux-based cell phone, ran a games team for Real Networks, and then started my first company, which was founded as Ontella and became PhotoBucket over time, which still kind of exists today, still puttering along. Founded my second company, SparkBuy, which is a comparison shopping service for consumer electronics, which is where we met, which existed for exactly 6 months before I sold the company to a guy I met on an airplane flight randomly who happened to work for Google. And then I worked as a CEO of a wholly owned Google subsidiary for a couple of years. I took a leave of absence and made a board game with my twins, who were then 4, now in high school. Wow. And the board game called Robot Turtles teaches kids as young as preschool basic principles of programming. That turned into an overnight Kickstarter sensation. It was the best-selling board game in Kickstarter history at the time. Wow. Had a blast being a board game magnate for a year. Then I licensed it to Ravensburger and Think Fun, who publish it today. And it's, you can still get it in specialty game stores. And fell in love with this technology that I discovered along the way, laser cutting and engraving. While I was prototyping game parts, I wound up with an industrial carbon dioxide cutting laser from a factory in China installed in my garage. Thought this is terrible and sort of amazing. And wouldn't it be incredible if we all had the ability to create that I now have? And so I've been leading Glowforge for more than 10 years. Wow. As we've been empowering people all across the US and globe to create beautiful things at the push of a button. And then most recently, about 2 years ago, reconnected with an old friend who happened to be running the generative AI lab at Wharton. Showed him some of the stuff we were doing at Glowforge with generative AI. Started talking about research. My parents are both professors, so it's like sort of runs in the blood. One thing led to another, and I'm now a senior research fellow at the Wharton Generative AI Lab. We've published about 3 papers on prompt engineering, and one that I'm really proud of some research on how LLMs can be influenced by the same psychological principles that influence people, which is a fascinating read, even if you only read the summary. That's a little bit of from there to here. So my day job is still 100% full-time CEO of the laser business, and I do a little bit of academic research on the side.
Wow, what an introduction, by the way. I knew of you obviously from our co-working space, and I had read about you in different publications, and I'll be honest, I've been humbled by some of the stuff that you've done, but let me ask this for other people who want to become like you. You know, I mean, do we all need to be raised in Seattle, have gone to UPenn as an was it undergrad or
I didn't go to UPenn. No, no.
Where did you go to school? Let me ask.
I went to Harvey Mudd College in Southern California, got an engineering degree. It's an unusual place because it's very small. There's only like 700 students, and the degree isn't specialized. So I did some chemical engineering, some electrical engineering, some computer engineering, and well, I've always worked in and around software until Glowforge, and even Glowforge has a huge software component. I've always been a ridiculously bad programmer. Like, I could write code under duress, but if I am, something's gone horribly awry and people should flee the building. The last programming language I had decent command of was C, with no pluses, just C in high school. Which is one of the things that's been so amazing about the generative AI revolution. I literally have 5 open VS Code windows on my desktop right now, prototyping 5 different things that, you know, maybe one of them will find their way into a Glowforge project, but who cares? Because I can knock each one out. I can knock all of them out collectively in a week or two, and then move on to the next set of experiments, all in my spare time,
right?
Which is just incredible.
It is. It is. I mean, we could jump right into this topic, honestly, and probably have a whole hour or 2 hours, maybe even 3 on AI. But before we get there, if you don't mind, what I'd love for you to share a little bit is part of the startup journey that you've experienced in the past 10 plus years with either Glowforge or maybe even the previous companies, because the whole SparkBuy thing was kind of fascinating from my perspective. I mean, literally, I just got to know you, and then literally a couple of weeks later, he's gone. And
there you go.
Yeah, yes. And then I'm reading about you in the newspapers, or at the time they had newspapers, I guess. Can I ask just briefly on that, because you get this offer from a guy I guess you met on the plane. How did you react to it? I mean, did you think it was serious? What were your thoughts at that time?
The reality is different than the way I just described it, but no less weird. I'll give you the short version. Actually, I wrote the long version of this in my book. It's called Hot Seat, the Startup CEO's Guidebook. One of the reasons I wrote it is because there's so few folks who do what you do, who actually go under the hood of how startups really work, not just the everything's coming up roses and perfect this and that, but the real challenges. And one of the specific things that was missing from that story was how companies get acquired, because they're generally bound by NDAs and hands tied. I got permission to talk in a great deal of detail about how our acquisition process worked. I didn't have any bankers. It was just me. So I got to see everything from start to finish. But the short version was I had a rule of thumb. I hate talking to people on airplanes. But if I was flying to or from the Bay Area, I would force myself to talk. And if I got bumped up into first class, I would force myself to talk, because high ratio of interesting serendipity from that. So I had left Photobucket and I was thinking about what I want to do next. And I was flying down to the Bay Area, and I got bumped up to first class. So I'm like, I have to talk to you. And the person next to me was a guy named Matt, who I actually had lunch with last week. And we were chit-chatting. Actually, I think he may have even started the conversation, asked me about my phone, which was one of the original Android phones, the Android G1, I think it was called. He's like, do you work for Google? And I was like, no, why? He's like, because I don't know anybody who has that phone who doesn't work for Google. And so we started chatting a little bit, and I told him about the 3 businesses that I was thinking about starting, because that's what I was flying down to the Bay Area to do, to talk about my next startup. And this one harebrained project I was working on. And he said, those 3 ideas are well and good and all, but that harebrained project is awesome. If you ever do that, call me. And gave me his card, which I promptly threw away and then didn't think of him again. And fast forward 3 months later, when we're in this weird mystery time warp building, and we launched, and there were 500 invites available on TechCrunch, and I got an email from him because he got invite number 437 right before they ran out. And he said, Dan, I'm the guy from the plane. You did it. You built the thing you told me about. We should have coffee. All right, great. Let's have coffee. So I booked the coffee. And while I was going to Google, I decided to catch up with another friend of mine who worked there. His name was Jonathan Sposato. He's at the time, maybe still the only person who'd ever been acquired by Google twice. And so I was just, on campus. So I figured I'd look him up. So we chatted, we had a great conversation. And as he was walking me to Matt's office for our next meeting, he said, by the way, who are you meeting? I told him, and he said, oh. I said, what is it, Jonathan? Spit it out. It's like, I don't want to mislead you or, lead you astray, but the acquisition of my last company started when Matt asked me to have coffee. And I said, oh, does he like M&A? He was like, no, he's just well connected and creative. And he sort of sees pieces and helps people put them together. Like, I don't know, but that's just a thing. Well, that's exactly what wound up happening. Matt wound up pulling together some pieces and connecting me with different folks who were looking for things. And 3 months later, SparkBuy was owned by Google.
Wow. I imagine when you got the news, you probably told your wife, and your wife probably was like, "Are you kidding me?" Or was she like, "Lottery," or I think I read some things about that was life-changing money from what I remember reading. Is that correct? Or
Yeah,
how?
I mean, it was, so first it wasn't surprise it happened. It was, whoa, here's this weird thing. I wonder what's going to happen. Are we going to do this? Are we not? What's going on? Etc. And so, finally, like, the signing was the last moment. But it's one of those things that it took 3 months to put together with lots of ups and downs. It looked like the deal might fall apart. I might take a financing instead, and some investors wanted things, and other companies were interested, and so on. So it was a long, slow build. And I'd never had an exit. So, like, our savings were much lighter, and I was constantly worried about, like, man, if I didn't have a job for 6 months, that could be a real problem. And while it didn't catapult me into the, Forbes whatever, it meant that, okay, if I was unemployed for a year, we'd be okay. All right, I knew how we were going to put the kids through college. So that is pretty life-changing when you're not saying I need a paycheck every month in order to be able to move forward. So thank goodness. I also took a big chunk of that and said, I'm going to go use this to invest in startups in the same way people invested in me and get back to the startup ecosystem. I have no idea if I'm any good at angel investing, so I'm not doing this for money. I'm considering this like a karma, keep things circulating. Who knows what'll happen? And I invested in about 20 companies, 18 of which went bankrupt and to zero. One of which gave me back what I invested, and one of which returned 20x what I invested. So I wound up right about where I started.
Sounds like a VC to me, but anyway.
That is pretty much the way. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I have another question besides this exit that I feel like startup founders probably struggle with right at the beginning of any organization, and that is building of the team. So you obviously had to build the team with SparkBuy, and then you had to build the team with Glowforge, but maybe you had a little more money with Glowforge. Can you walk through a little bit of your thinking and how you perhaps approach this whole, possibly in my opinion, one of the most important steps in building a startup?
It's a disaster. Building a team is just so freaking brutal and thankless. You start with the founding teams, and I did a little research on this for my book, but the short version is pick basically any startup tech startup that became a multi-billion-dollar success, and you will find a broken founding team with founders who didn't make it to the end, right? Like Microsoft, Oracle. You go through, and every one of them had like the, Facebook. Yeah, see the movie, the original founders, and then the people who actually made it, and there was always a bad decision in the first one. And while it's a little hard to see the data, also almost every exec who the startup hires gets fired at some point, and or it leaves. It's just natural. Look at the number, the first execs, and look at the final execs. The best case is they did a great job and they were great for their role for a while and then, moved on. But often it's that, no, they weren't the right person and, had to be swapped out. And I think one of the biggest challenges is you just have to have a tremendous degree of humility as an executive about your own ability to pick people. You do your best, and then you learn from what you've done and you iterate, and sometimes you have to part ways with folks and sometimes bring new folks on. It's the worst thing, absolute worst thing. Parting ways with folks is the one part of my job that brings me closest to crying on a human level. I don't get deeply heartbroken about losing money or missing out on a business opportunity. I feel that way about impacting somebody's livelihood. And there isn't, as far as I know, there isn't any Rosetta Stone that's going to tell you, this person is the person who's going to do that job perfectly. It's funny because when I talk to colleagues who, who I've grown with, who I know well, and who are people who I deeply trust, I will often say, like fellow executives who work for me, I will be like, I don't trust my gut. I'll say this all the time. People are like, what are you talking about? I'm like, oh, I have a terrible gut for like, this person's going to be great. This person's going to be terrible. My gut is easily influenced. It's subject to all sorts of nonsense and like signals that don't make sense. The person dresses sloppy or dresses well. The person talks like me or doesn't talk like me. Heaven knows what level of biases. Like those are all my gut. So when I'm interviewing, it's all about like, let's solve problems together. Let's talk about how we work together. Let's talk about what you're looking for. And the whole time I'm assuming that like any sufficiently experienced executive is likely to be telling you what you want to hear, not what is closest to the truth, because great executives have the experience to be able to fill gaps, and you're coming to them with a gap and they're going to do their best to fill it. So it's really hard to beat somebody who you've worked with before, where you have that experience. It's really hard to beat somebody where you have a shared network and understand their experience. It's really, and at the end of the day, you look for the experience you need. You look for the person who's the best fit, and then you try it. Hope to heck it works out. But it's pretty tough, and I wish I could say something other than luck is a huge portion of it. Luck is a huge portion of it.
Yeah, it feels like it. Well, after you select them, however, then I think the next possible topic, which I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are, is how do you divide equity, or how do you motivate these individuals, or what ends up being fair? Because I mean, one thing that I've noticed about you, and I don't know if you even realize I noticed this about you, probably didn't, is I could tell you're a very humane, kind, generous soul, but yet you were very savvy, had the chops to basically get where you're at. And I could tell almost immediately after I'd met you, and being both sides, where you're trying to be good, but at the same time you're being savvy and trying to build this thing that could have massive impact. How do you do it? Because Bezos, for example, are all the well-known names that we have in history. I imagine because where they're at in terms of like the Forbes list that we talked, the richest people in the world, it's because they've held on to a lot of equity, right? And that's why they're able to get to the places that they've gone. But I feel like you're the type that may not be in the top 10, but maybe someday could be in the top 1,000 or so, because you're smart, but yet you're trying to be generous. What are your thoughts on that?
It's very kind of you to say. And I was not expecting this to be an ad for Hot Seat, but as it happens, there is a whole chapter of the book on how to divide equity.
I see.
And honestly, I'll tell you, I take a very structured approach. I try to think about like how can you make it make sense, the way you divide equity with colleagues, with your co-founders, the way that you allocate equity to the team. And the reason that I work so hard to use structure is because I just want to give people things and be nice and kind and generous. Like my gut is be generous, be kind, and give the thing and make it fair. And so I'm like, okay, that's not going to get me anywhere. That's going to wind up with me being unfair. And whoever I feel the warmest to or feel the most guilty about gets the most, and that's not fair to the people who don't. And so on. So I go to like, okay, how do I build structure around it? Where does value come from? How do you determine where that value comes from? How do you reward that value? And the thing that I try to be honest with myself and with my team about is to say, we're going to use market value as our benchmark of how we do it. So is it fair that a designer and a graphic designer and a computer scientist who work side by side for the same number of hours a day with the same love and drive and passion, who spend the same for their college educations, get paid differently? Is it fair that they get replaced by AI at the same time? That's a different conversation. Is it fair they get paid differently? No, not at all. Is it a market reality? Yes, it is. Am I going to come in and say, I feel equally for both of you and value you both, so I'm going to pay you both the same? I don't think that's going to build a good business. So I'm going to say, hey, what I'm compensating you isn't a reflection of what I think of you or your worth. It's a reflection of what I think the market indicates. And so equity allocation, salary compensation, I do based on surveys. I do based on data, so that I can honestly say, this isn't about comporting with my values. It's about building a business around a set of guidelines. And my values are okay with that. They're neutral on that. Right? Like if I was doing values-based compensation, I don't know, pay everybody the same, pay people who have more needs, like a sick parent more. I don't know. Like I don't have a good solution for that. So I tend to go to the data as a way to solve that. And because there's not a lot of data around the co-founder question, how to split that, that's where in the book I kind of go in and I'm like, here's a way that you can use some math to go and take what's sort of the market data as best I can parse it and turn it into a real equity split that's fair.
Interesting. Well, so far with at least the first couple of questions, well answered in my opinion, and I think it's going to be very insightful for the people who get to listen. But let me ask this, rolling back a bit. Did you partake in any accelerators? Did you have any education in this whole startup process, or was a lot of this from the hip? I mean, like the intelligence that you're using, and then obviously, in the book, which I did get to see and or briefly got to see that you wrote, and congratulations on that. And yes, we'll use this as an ad as much as possible. Is like, how did you come to this understanding and how did you execute on these different fronts? Because obviously, even with the first exit or first major exit, you took it in a very methodical approach. So I do know Harvey Mudd because a friend of mine was actually applying to Harvey Mudd when I was at Puyallup High School of all places, and he ended up going to Rice. And at the time,
great engineering school.
Yeah, Rice was great. And, in my college consulting years, I learned about all of them from Carnegie Mellon to MIT to, Georgia Tech, et cetera. And then the UW recently has been killing it as far as like the comp sci program. But anyway, with all that said, you think in a very methodical, way. But was it just that, or was it these accelerators? Was the mentors? Tell us a little bit about that.
Zoom all the way back. In 2000, I was at Microsoft, tried to start a company, a video game company, total disaster, didn't get anywhere. I think I had one VC call that was 30 minutes. That was it. I didn't know who to talk to, what to do, totally lost. In 2002, I went to another startup and just drank from the fire hose. I would regularly corner the CEO and be like, why are you doing this? What's going on? How do you do this thing? And he was kind of annoyed and amused and would, give me little tidbits. Went to Real Networks where I led their real arcade team, like living the childhood dream of building video games. Lasted a year. And and I was reading, there were 3 bloggers. David Hornick from August Capital, can't remember who the second one was, and Brad Feld from Foundry Group, and followed them religiously. And I'm like, I'm going to go do a startup, and founded the company that would become PhotoBucket. Tried to pitch Brad, got nowhere. I remember went to a signing and like talked to him afterwards. I'm like, hey, it's like, hey, and sent him nothing. I was like, oh man, too bad. Okay. And for 9 months, I read every scrap I could read because in 2004, there was nobody talking about startups in VC outside of just a few blogs. Like Y Combinator was a couple of folks in Boston. Like I think that was before they moved to the Valley. They're like incubators, and nobody was talking about it. And to the extent they were talking about it, was all patting themselves on the back about how easy it was. And time after time, I would have these coffees and these drinks or whatever, and I'd be like, how'd you raise the money for your company? And they're like, well, you just talk to your network. I'm like, I don't have a network. And they're like, well, you just, and I'm like, this is all like, you're not solving the bootstrap problem. Found the first company. You're telling me as an experienced executive who could seed the first year of development, who could go to their former colleagues and do it, but I got none of that. How do I do it? And I swore that after, like, when I finally cracked the nut and got this company funded, I would tell people how to do it and I wouldn't keep it a secret. The good news is I wrote the book to fulfill that promise. The bad news is it was a stupid answer. The way I finally got the company funded was there was this one guy who I'd been trying for 9 months to meet with, who was like the preeminent wireless investor or one of the preeminent wireless investors in Seattle. And he kept blowing me off and not answering my emails and whatever. And I went to we were in the company was wireless cloud services for camera phones back before we had cloud services, back when we had camera phones. And so I went to this conference in Barcelona because it was the big wireless thing. And it was a huge stretch financially to go there. And I saw him at a bar in Barcelona and just happened to bump into him and struck up a conversation. What do you mean you're from Seattle? oh my gosh, I'm from Seattle too. We should talk. Yeah, we should. Let's do it back in Seattle. And so the guy who had been chasing for 9 months back in Seattle, I ran into in Barcelona and got the meeting, who led the Series A, who pulled in all the investors, who did everything like to bring the round together. It was his credibility that ultimately got the deal done. How do you replicate that? What do you learn from it? I don't know. Bang your head against the wall until the wall crumbles. And by the way, the day before you succeed, it looks exactly like the previous 180 days of failure, or whatever 30 times 9 is. Terrible at mental math.
Yeah, exactly.
270 days of failure. No. Anyway, you figure out how much you can take, you give it all you can, and then you say this isn't working, and you move on. By the way, I'm not one of those people who's like max your credit cards and mortgage your house to do your startup because it's because you don't hear the stories of people who did that. It doesn't work out. I hear those stories, and they're terrible, and they happen way more than the folks who bet their everything and then made it work. It's the people who bet their everything and then lost their everything, and that's not it. So you figure out what you can afford to take your bet, what you can afford to bet. You bet it, and if it doesn't work out, you give up. I was on a 12-month timer. If I hadn't got it to work in 12 months, I would have gone back and gotten a real job. I got it in month 9. Could have really easily been something else. If you'd gotten to the bar an hour later, then I might never have created a startup.
Yeah, no, I hear the story quite often, meaning like I ask and I try to reverse engineer a lot of the thoughts, and there are not a lot of commonalities. I mean, like there are, but there aren't, right? And there is a little bit of luck involved, right?
I would so disagree. There is a lot of luck, not a little bit.
Okay,
It is
I was gonna
the
say
dominant factor.
I thought you were going to say there's a lot of commonality in this, but
No.
anyway, go ahead.
It is the role of CEO is actually you're the chief serendipity officer. You're the one in charge of making the company lucky.
Yeah.
You go to the things and you shake the hands and you talk to the people and you just look and you look and you look for your opportunity. By the way, I pitched Brad that first company. I pitched SparkBuy. I didn't pitch the game business because that was just me. He led the Glowforge Series A and has been our chair of the board ever since, and is now a dear personal friend who I talk to at least once a week.
Similarly, I just interviewed a startup founder who's been on Wall Street for many years, examined many of the companies, done a lot of investments, and she says something similar in that you just need the resilience as a startup founder, right? You need to be able to get back up. She talked about those blow up or those dolls that literally get right back up, the ones that you hit and it goes back up. You have to be that as the startup founder. And hopefully.
Yeah, it doesn't end when you fail, it ends when you give up.
It does. It does.
And lest I leave on that note, sometimes you have to give up.
True.
Some companies don't work. And I've seen people destroy their lives trying to make something work that was not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, you hit one of the nails on the head is that we hear the stories of all the successes in the media. We don't hear about all these failures because the failures would be kind of sad and depressing and possibly actually influence everybody to not do a startup. So, and I don't know, maybe there should be a podcast someday about all the failures. Maybe there is. But with that said, I'm hoping that we can focus on, at least today, some of the great things that you learned along the way. Well, with that said, we're now in 2025. You have Glowforge. It sounds like it's humming or doing very well. And honestly, I've seen a bit in the media. And can you just tell us a little bit about how that's going and just what has happened since the beginning till now? It's been 10 years. That's a long time for a startup.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. We started out with a crowdfunding campaign. We planned to sell. We said our goal was $1 million. Our secret goal was 5 million, 5 times that. We wound up selling $28 million worth of product in a month. And we said, we're going to need a bigger boat. We hunkered down. We got a bigger manufacturing partner. We redesigned because we knew there was going to be a lot more of these in the world than we thought, and took 3 years to bring the product to market. Brought it to market. Overnight failure. When we launched, there was no demand. We're like, where'd all the demand go? And then we had to build demand from where it was and start the marketing and the Karen and no, you can buy it now. And then everybody remembered Glowforge again. Had a huge surge. We had the pandemic of everybody crafting from home, which was amazing. And then we had the transition coming out of lockdown where we saw more and more of our customers as small businesses and schools. Now, many thousands of schools have Glowforge lasers and adding them regularly. But it's all centered around this idea that we could make it really easy to create things at the push of a button. That you can come up with an idea and bring that to life simply and without the need for an expensive machine shop, specialized training, etc. So like if I just, reach around me, I've got like my well-loved mouse pad. It's kind of ugly now, but I love it. And I haven't changed it because at the start of the pandemic, I was like, I'm going to be spending some time at this desk. And I took a piece of leather and I took a map of the city of Seattle. It's an antique map of Seattle from the Library of Congress that I found online. And I engraved it on here. And this thing, this is 5 years old and it's something I made in an hour going, oh, this would be fun to have. Show you another one. My wallet. I'll try not to open this in a way that shows off my credit card numbers. But this comes from a design in our catalog. It takes about 20 minutes to print, and then it takes about 2 hours to assemble if you've never done anything with leather before, which I hadn't. All the holes are cut, so it's like lacing up a shoe. You take a dull needle, it's important, and then you go back and forth through these holes while you're watching a movie, and you just go up, down, up, down, up, down, and then you wind up with something really beautiful that'll last. This is, oh gosh, I did this on an early prototype. This is like 8 years old, and I carry it with me every day. All around, I have little fixtures, the clamp that holds my camera in place and the thing that holds my phone charger, little bits of personalization in the world all around, which are all things that we're just like, oh, I'm going to make this thing. And then you draw it, you sketch it, you can tell the AI what you want, and it will make those things for you. And it is incredible to have the power of creation at your own fingertips.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for you because it's funny that the industry obviously has, at least in terms of excitement and whatever you want to call it, has been taken over by AI because AI takes over everything, or it has been in the past few years. But when I saw your industry blossoming, and I would argue it's still blossoming, but just quietly, from what I can tell, you're able to literally create anything. No, I mean, I see what you're showing me now, but I know here in Austin, they're making 3D homes, or at least I heard that there was an organization or company here that's actually just creating these structures out of whatever technology. I don't, to be honest, I don't understand it enough to really talk about it enough. But I would say we're talking about creating everything in the world, like at your fingertips. No.
I think that's possible, and I think that's something that we are positioned to help the world do. And for me, that's really exciting because if you think about it, we humanity are creatures of tools. Part of what separates us from the animals. And for most of human existence, if you want something, you made it yourself, or you made something yourself and traded it for something that somebody else had made. In the last couple hundred years, that we've turned that on its head and say people don't make things anymore. Factories make things. And it's odd and adorable if you make things for yourself, if you crochet or if you woodwork or leathercraft or whatever. But that's not really the way it's supposed to be. I mean, it'd be like if all of us ate only frozen TV dinners and it was weird to have a kitchen, but it shouldn't be. Everybody should have the power to create things for themselves. And so that idea that we can bring back the idea that the things that you use are homemade, are personal, are created by and for you, and that things that you make yourself can be better, faster, cheaper, more beautiful than the things you buy from the store, and that technology can help us get there. To me, that's what's exciting. The same advances that first took away our ability to make things by centralizing them in factories can give them back by giving us the tools to make things ourselves. Yeah, my trusty Glowforge and me.
Yeah, I did notice that behind you, by the way. Your industry is fascinating. A lot of startups are, on all these services, et cetera. You're basically creating hardware to a certain degree, if not fully. You must have learned a lot in this process. Tell us a little bit about that, because I don't know how many trips you made to China or whatever countries you might have to outsource, a lot of the building or whatever. Maybe you're doing a lot in the United States. In my opinion, you're doing something like Elon Musk does with Tesla. You're having to deal with all these manufacturing processes. What are some learnings that you learned along the way?
As soon as you move from electrons to atoms, the world gets a lot more complicated. And I don't know, one of the ways I describe this for friends in software who are like, oh man, it must be nice to work on hardware with things you can like see and touch. And I say, well, okay, I want you to imagine Imagine it's March, spring is around the corner, and you're just getting ready for whatever your favorite springtime, Easter, Passover, whatever is. Your COO says, okay, we need to finalize our forecast for how many products we're going to sell this Christmas. Because if we don't place the order right now for the long lead time parts, we won't have them in time for the Christmas season. The amount of cash that you put out right now is the maximum number of units we're going to sell. The holiday season's better than we think. We're going to lose all that money. And if it's worse, then we're going to lose all that money. We're going to either lose the money we put into the components or we're going to lose the money that we could have used to sell. But I need to know by the end of the week what our Christmas sales are going to be. Happy Easter, Passover.
Wow.
That's the hardware business. That's one little piece of the hardware business. And that kind of supply chain wild nonsense is truly fascinating. If you are a puzzle solver who likes to put pieces together and stack uncertainties on top of uncertainties, man, that is the thing for you. But it is one that requires large investment, because if you don't, then one small miss will put you out of the game. It requires tremendous amount of detail and planning, which, by the way, I'm terrible at, so I had to hire people who are good at that. It requires deep experience, and if you don't have it, then you're going to be living in another country until you get it, and probably several mistakes along the way. And there are just 1,000,001 ways to fail above and beyond the 1,000,001 ways there are to fail in a software-only startup.
With that said, in retrospect, would you have made another choice to possibly?
No, I love learning new things.
Okay.
And I love the business we've created. I love the customers I get to work with. Being able to go on Instagram, type in Glowforge. And this is what I do if I'm like, why am I going to work again? Like, I'll go look at the Glowforge hashtag on Instagram and see the incredible things that people are creating using the technology. And they buoy my heart. And you can't beat that. Actually empowering people to bring new things into the world, like that very much feels like I'm fulfilling or paying forward something that was given to me. Helping people to create their own small businesses, their own Kickstarters, their own Etsy stores, build a living, or just building beautiful things that they care about for themselves.
One question I guess I think people might ask as future founders / managers of these organizations is, what's a typical day? You've probably been asked this question. What's a typical day that you have now with Glowforge?
No such thing. I've got my sort of array throughout the week of standard meetings, and some of those are group meetings and some of those are one-on-ones. And then it is whatever needs attention. It's very well. I really love having a pool of slow work and a bunch of fast work that needs to be done at any given point in time. I like being interrupt driven and sort of going from one thing to now's a meeting, now's an emergency, I'm going to move the meeting out, now's another meeting. Like, for me, that's a fun way to go. I'm okay with, like, here's your project and here's a week to do it. But yeah, I like the phrase, the saying, if you save it to the last minute, then it only takes 1 minute. I've always been a bit of a procrastinator. And so while I've gotten better and I've gotten the skills to manage my time better, the world where I wind up with a lot of breaking this needs attention is one that is very comfortable for me. So my schedule is chaotic. If I have no travel and it's a totally typical week and there's no emergencies, then maybe a third of my time will be free. 2/3 is booked. But most weeks there's some emergencies, there's some travel, and so it's booked completely solid. So basically, I have an odd schedule. I'm a total night owl. So my first meeting is at 10, and I usually don't take meetings before 10. I'll have more or less nonstop meetings up until 6. And I work from home. Our company's almost fully remote. So at 6, I'll roll up and kids will get home and we'll have lunch together as a family and we'll hang out for a little bit. And around 7:30 or 8, I'll come back here where I work until about 3 in the morning. And that's when I get all my really good work done. And that's when I experiment and I play around and do AI research, finish the projects that didn't get done during the day. That's where I get a chance to be sort of intellectually playful and experiment. But I love all of it. It's all just different parts that make the day interesting.
I swear to God, this is probably one of the more inspirational talks that we had for our listeners. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Brandon. Really a treat.
If your calendar isn't already set, you're missing out on startup wins. Industry leaders, top advisors, and incredible tips await. Come back for future great episodes and entertaining guests, and come back for more insider strategies and incredible stories from the brightest VCs, founders, and operator experts. We're bringing you the best in the business twice a month. Hit that bell and stay winning with Startup Wins. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to part 1 of our incredible interview with Dan Shapiro. In part 2 of our special 2-part series with the CEO of Seattle's 3D printing powerhouse, Glowforge, Dan shares more startup wins for all of you founders out there and advisors who truly are looking for actionable advice on how to get from 0 to more than 100 million in ARR. Look out for the second part here on Startup Wins on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast distribution network. I'm Brandon Ah, host of Startup Wins. We thank you for your kind support and let us know how we can help you add to your dreams of building the ultimate startup.